fighting for America's freedom.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching the John Woodard Show. Today, our guest is Tony Cowden. He's a candidate for the congressional 3rd District seat currently held by Greg Murphy. And we're pleased to have him on the air with us today and hope you'll find his information very useful as you go to the polls. Tony, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing great, John. I run around all over this huge district, meeting so many great new folks, and they're trying to make a positive change. And while it can be a little tiring putting that many miles in and each day, but we're doing great, getting the word out, and definitely getting a lot of support.
What do you do for a living now, Tony, now that you're out of the military?
So I'm still partly in the military for one piece. I still belong to the National Guard. I work for 20th Special Forces Group, which is one of the 2 Reserve or National Guard Special Forces groups. I still contract for the government, for our intelligence agencies, and I own my own business, and it's called Capable Incorporated. I teach civilians, law enforcement, and military firearms, marksmanship, long-range shooting, driving, and pretty much anything that someone with my background could legally transfer to those different entities.
Well, you've got a tremendous military background. Why don't you give our audience a little insight?
Well, yeah, so I always wanted to serve. I joke, even though it's not really a joke, that my father let me watch Rambo: First Blood when I was far too young, and that shaped what I wanted to do in my future. So I did. I enlisted in the Army in 1997 and picked the best path I could to get to Special Forces selection. And the Special Forces are also, you'll hear them referred to as Green Berets. And I passed the selection course. I passed the training school, which is, almost 2 years long, and found myself in Special Forces at a very young age, very early in my career. I served from 1997 to 2005 for my first enlistment. I was lucky enough to be part of the first guys to go into Afghanistan, and then again part of the first bunch that got to go into Iraq. And I've also had some firsts in other countries like Syria, Libya, Somalia, Yemen, all the wonderful places that our so-called leadership in DC, and I'm including the executive and our Congress and the legislative branch, have thought it wise to keep us in combat. You'll find as we talk that a lot of the reason I'm running is because those 2 branches of government have kept us in wars that we didn't need to be in, wars that gave America no real strategic advantage, no economic advantages, and to be frank, got a lot of Americans killed for nothing. But yeah, in 2005, I got hurt. I broke my back, thought my Army career was over, and I got out. I took a non-combat type role at the intelligence agency, and then I got healthy. I didn't think I was going to be able to walk very well again, if ever, and I got better. And clearly, I overcame that prognosis, and I took a job with basically the Special Forces of the intelligence agency, if you kind of think of it like that. And there are a lot of, for the most part, the intelligence agency they don't have a way to create special operations soldiers, so they hire us as contractors. Of course, we have to go through a strenuous vetting process, security clearances, background checks, all that sort of stuff, just to interview for the job. And that's probably important to note in what the latest in the race that I'm having here in Carolina. But the intelligence agency is dual role. A lot of folks don't know that. Overseas, it we actually do have it's a combat role in support of intelligence operations, which is kind of backwards from the military, because the military has intelligence services that support combat operations. So it's a little backwards, but ultimately for us on the ground, it's the same work. So I've done that for the last 16 years, since 2005. So I continue to do that type of work. I turned down my last deployment to the Ukraine a few weeks ago. I guess it's been almost 6 weeks ago now. My team went to Ukraine, and I was faced with quite the decision: go to the Ukraine or continue to run for Congress. Well, I think the sake of our nation is more important than the sake of the Ukraine. So I chose to stay here and stay in this race for the U.S. House of Representatives.
Well, that's, I guess if you get elected, that'll make two of you Green Berets up there in Congress.
Yes, Colonel Waltz or Representative Waltz is up there currently. We have 8 others running as we speak across the nation. Jay Collins down in Florida, Anderson up in Virginia. Christian Casanelli and Phil Harrington, both running here in North Carolina. They're out on the other side of I-95, districts out that way. And I think that's interesting to note, because it's not just 8 Green Berets. There's also 6 Navy SEALs and about 30 global war on terrorism veterans running. All of us with the same or very similar outlook on these illegal wars, these unjust wars, these unconstitutional wars that our representatives have allowed to go on and on and on. We're all tired of it. They're huge wastes of money. The only people that have benefits, the military industrial complex. So you've got all these global war on terrorism veterans, both special operations and conventional operations, running because we're tired of politicians. We're tired of the mess they put us in. We're tired of the economic absolute mess that they've gotten us in by voting for all these COVID mandates and stimulus packages and so on and so on. Couple that with the Afghanistan pullout. It all falls on representatives, or what I call so-called representatives. It's their fault. They all want to blame. They want to blame Biden or Trump or whichever president. That's such a politician approach. They always blame others. So it's frustrating for us.
What did you do? What was your primary objective overseas? If you can talk about that.
Well, number one was hunting down our terrorist enemies. That's probably the overarching goal of every operation I ever participated in, was to engage, capture, or frankly kill America's terrorist enemies, whether that be Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or any of the other Al-Qaeda shoot-offs or Muslim extremist terrorist organizations. Like I said, that for me, that expands to Yemen, Libya, Somalia, Mali, and of course, Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan.
The fight still goes on over there, doesn't it? Even though American troops have been removed, isn't the fight still ongoing?
Yes. While we did pull out from Afghanistan, we still have, and a majority of the troops are your special operations types in Syria, in Iraq, and in all the African countries that I spoke about. And of course, with us, the intelligence agency, we're in even more places than the military.
What made you decide to run for Congress, other than the general dissatisfaction with the political class?
that is the primary piece there. It's watching the way they treat us, the way the elitists and the establishment look down their noses, at the regular people. And let's face it, our founding fathers created the House of Representatives and modeled it after Great Britain's House of Commons, the House of Common People, the house that was supposed to represent the common folks. And our elitist politicians have dragged us so far away from that, what our founding fathers intended. My primary goal, because I think it's the biggest goal for the greatest return on investment that any representatives could do, and it's simply return our federal government to its constitutional left and right limits. Our founding fathers built a box that our federal government was supposed to be in, and that box, that framework, comes from our Constitution. And our federal government, through power grabs and politicians and career politicians, which is a phrase that absolutely should not even exist in American English dialects. Career politician, our founding fathers, it would make them nauseous to even hear that phrase, but here we are. So my overarching goal and motivation for running is to return our federal government back to its constitutional limitations, to cram that federal government back into that constitutional box that our founding fathers created.
I assume that you've had some speaking events with Congressman Murphy.
I've actually only twice. I've actually been in the same room as the fella, as a congressman. We've had multiple forums where candidates were asked questions, and the congressman is not big on public speaking when he has to be asked questions. He's one of those politicians who demands that only scripted questions and he gets to speak, no questions, that sort of thing. He likes that type of event because when he is pressed by a constituent with the hard questions, he becomes clearly rattled. So forums next to me, getting on stage next to me, is something that the representative, that Greg Murphy, continues to avoid. And I think to me, that's cowardice. And Lord knows we don't need cowards, any more cowards on Capitol Hill that'll buckle to the establishment and the so-called party leadership, corporations. But more so, a representative should be willing to get in front of his constituents at any time and answer any questions, no matter how difficult they may be. And that's to include candidates who are challenging them for office. I tell people all the time, if I do win, I will make certain that I'm at any debates in 2 years with any candidates. I welcome the democratic process. The challenging of incumbents is part of our process. And they do everything they can to dissuade folks from getting into politics. Their nasty behavior, I've heard it all week. In the last week, Congressman Murphy has done quite a bit to try to smear my character and exaggerate a few charges I had in my life and so on and so forth. And it's just nasty. And the number one thing I get from folks on it is that, I don't want to get in politics because of that. And that breaks my heart that the establishment will use such dirty tactics to dissuade an entire demographic of good people who would otherwise participate in our government and do good things. It's just not the way our founding fathers set this up.
Well, that brings me to the 3rd District Convention. It's my understanding that you were present when one of his supporters or one of his employees said something to him about not having to speak to those people. What was that all about?
Well, so it actually, that actually happened at Craven County's Reagan Lincoln dinner the night before the convention. So last Friday night. Uh, a friend of mine, frankly, was in attendance and at the table with me. He's a retired veteran, a Marine, a legend in the Scout Sniper community, and he has sent Murphy's office letters, emails, made phone calls with no reply. And that's very common. That's a very common story with our veterans here, that the congressman and his office do very little to even reply, much less help them. Well, Lee asked the congressman the question that he wanted answered, and the congressman said, "I don't have to talk to these people," as he passed Lee by. Lee became agitated and raised his voice and said, "You're my representative. You're supposed to work for me." And the congressman completely blew him off and exited the building at a pretty fast pace. It was pretty, it's heartbreaking. Because like I said, Lee is just such a good man who's spent his entire life serving our nation. And for an elitist career politician to not value his question and not value his time, not value the concerns, I mean, that's just unacceptable. It's simply unacceptable. Our veterans, and of course I'm biased, right? I am biased towards veterans because I am one. I've spent my entire life taking care of my soldiers and so many other soldiers, Marines, sailors, right? I use the soldier as kind of a blanket term. And Lord knows my Marines will get a little aggravated about that. But, they deserve better. A representative for the 3rd District that is home to Camp Lejeune, 2nd largest Marine Corps base. It's home to Seymour Johnson. It's home to Cherry Point, the largest Marine Corps air station. Those personnel, not just the military, but also the civilian personnel that work on those bases and support those bases, they deserve a representative that understands their needs and will work hard to accomplish them. And that's frankly, it's just not Greg Murphy. Greg Murphy is an advocate for his background, and that's the medical community. He's a doctor and a surgeon. And we see it in his voting record. We see it in his behaviors. We see it in the fact that he protects hospitals. He's all about Obamacare. He's been very vocal about supporting Obamacare, Medicaid, Medicare expansion. And that's just, it's not helpful for Eastern North Carolina. His concerns just don't help us.
These politicians, you admire the ones who have gone to the fight themselves, or those who have children that have gone to the fight. Those people are doing that for the right reason.
Right.
But all those like Murphy, who have never done it, never worn the uniform, to talk down to people that have made that sacrifice to one degree or another, that's pretty disgusting. I worked for Congressman Murphy when he was first seeking election. And I was just a volunteer like a lot of others. But I have since come to realize that he's a pretty self-absorbed guy.
And that's really just sad. I think maybe Congressman Murphy could represent Charlotte or maybe Wake County or, I don't know, Seattle, and do just fine for people who live in those areas, much more liberal, much more Democrat type voters. Because let's face it, that's just how Greg votes. I mean, he's got low 70% ratings from the ACU, CPAC itself. iVoter Guide calls him a moderate, which is kind of funny because iVoter Guide actually rates you on your own answers to questions. So when Greg answered those questions, he rated himself a moderate. His voting record shows us. He voted against HR 2471 Section J. That is the entire budget for Veterans Affairs. It includes improvements in housing and improvements in the medical care system itself, rehab programs, prosthetics development programs, service dog programs for PTSD victims, the entire budget of Veterans Affairs. And what really frustrates me about that is that he did it only a few weeks after abandoning the Veterans Affairs Committee, which was something that, as you probably well know, was a campaign promise. He promised to be on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and at the very first chance he got, he left it for the Ways and Means Committee. And the Ways and Means Committee is the Tax and Spend Committee. You know, it's all about revenues and drawing up new tax laws. So yeah, his priorities are just elsewhere. They're not of this district.
Well, what of the various things that are wrong with government, you know, a friend of mine told me the other day that, you know, here lately, you get up every day and there's another problem coming at you from a different direction. And, but with all of that said, what are the 2 or 3 top issues that as a congressman you would want to focus on?
Well, first and foremost, it's got to be breaking down the establishment. Representatives like Greg and so many of the other ones, you know, because of their behaviors, people now refer to the two parties as the uniparty. As in other words, the Democrats and Republicans, you know, they're two wings on the same bird. And, you know, you hear them say reaching across the aisle. Well, what that really means out of someone like Greg means a compromise with the Democrats, a compromise with the crazy liberals. It doesn't mean that the liberals are doing anything to make the Republicans and us conservatives happy, right? That's just not what's happened. So first and foremost, we've got to address the establishment and go against the party, and therefore at the same time advocate for your district. I look at it like this: if every representative magically tomorrow, just magically, started looking out for the interests of the people who live in their districts and stop working for the party, stop working for the speaker, stop doing as they're told and voting party lines, well, much of our problems would be solved overnight, right? So to me, that's a big bang for a buck. If there's one thing we can do, and that goes along the lines of what I'm talking about, stuffing that federal government back into its constitutional box. So if that's the first thing, then the second thing is dealing with all these agencies that come up with regulations that stifle our growth, that interfere with our business, you know, from OSHA to the ATF, you know, the IRS. These are all organizations that the Constitution does not authorize. They're unconstitutional. And what's worse is, like we saw during the pandemic and in stimulus packages that funded this, that Greg voted for, were the mandates and the packages that kept businesses closed, that kept the masks on us, that stifled our economy and led to this current inflation and super increase in cost of living. And this is one of those things that's a good point, that they're all blaming Biden for it. They want you to think that Biden caused this. Well, of course he had a lot to do with it. But when Republicans like Greg vote for every single 4 out of 4 stimulus packages that supported Biden's agenda, well, you can't blame Biden. If you authorize the money from Congress, because that's what Congress does, Congress has the power of the purse. So they could cut the funds for all this government overreach that Biden forced down our throats, but they didn't. Greg voted for all 4, and one of those was HR 550, the vaccine database and tracking system that would track us, those of us who chose not to get the vaccine. which Greg's a huge proponent of, right? Greg has many times spoken out and said that you need to get the vaccine. He even recommended that pregnant women get the vaccine. So that's how far crazy left Greg is. And, while he would say he's not for the mandates, he also didn't oppose them, and he voted for the money that perpetuated the mandates. So you can't be an enabler of something and then claim to have nothing to do with it. That's why we call them politicians, and we don't use that word as a good word, right? Politician is a swear word in most of our vernacular. So on the short term, being the third thing, it is addressing our economy. And this is another huge frustration of mine. Not once have you heard out of Greg or any other representatives emergency tax cuts, right? We just filed taxes last week. There was no emergencies. There was no, they could have just done an emergency extension, right? Extended the filing date to where people didn't have to pay taxes right now. But they could have cut our income taxes drastically. But because they overspend so daggone much, right? They can't afford to cut taxes. It's just such a dang mess. I mean, so yeah, short term's got to be dealing with our economy, get it back up and going, but also security. Because let's face it, we can't have a nice economy if we aren't secure. So that southern border has to be taken care of. Our illegal immigration problem has got to be addressed right now. And you see it, right? They're blaming Biden, but they could easily enact emergency legislation to fund the wall, put soldiers on our border if need be, and we probably need it at this point. The Border Patrol can't handle it. The problem has gotten so severe. And then, because that's short term, right? Because just building a wall doesn't really address illegal immigration. We're going to have to help our southern neighbors deal with their problems. We're going to have to invest in Mexico, right? And I don't mean waste money, right? That's a government term, right? That's a government definition of investment. When I use the word investment, I mean it like a small business owner, right? That I'm going to expect a return and I'm going to be accountable for the money. So we have to help Mexico deal with its cartels. We have to look at Venezuela and all these other southern neighbors who have vast resources. Invest in them. It's really the Monroe Doctrine, right? The Monroe Doctrine said that America would protect, bolster, and invest our Western Hemisphere. So from Canada, Alaska, Canada, all the way to Chile and Argentina, we would take care of the Western Hemisphere. And we've gotten away from that. Our representatives have sent us to and funded wars and operations and spending all over the world, except for right here in our own backyard. So short-term, wall, security, illegal immigration, long-term, dealing with and investing in our southern neighbors, building a strong Western Hemisphere that we no longer have to worry about what's going on in Europe and Ukraine and Iraq, Afghanistan, right? Let's let Europe deal with its own mess.
There's been a lot of talk recently that the Democrats have done almost nothing to convince the voters of America that they want to get back to a normal way of life, a normal economy, to ameliorate some of the problems that they have created. That the reason is that they know they're going to get shellacked in the election, and that they that there's going to be something of a national emergency that's going to give the president the opportunity to invoke the Emergency Powers Act and not and avoid the necessity of the event of the election, which would create tremendous civil upheaval in the United States. Have you thought about that? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yes, I'm always concerned because we're always on the edge of losing our freedoms. And it's clear to me that the Democrats, along with the help and support of many Republicans, they want to fundamentally change our nation. They want socialism. They want a modern, completely, I mean, even worse form of communism than what we've seen before. We know that, with Stalin's communism, he killed millions of people to gain his power. I think our twisted, progressive, liberal communists here in America, they don't even see far enough down the road that that's what they're toying with when they start trying to destroy our system. There are so many good, hardworking patriots in this country that will resist communism, especially this insane progressivism that the liberals have created in the last decade or so. We're not going to do that. We're not going to deal with that. So as far as the Dems or President Biden causing a basically what would be a fight if he does enact emergency powers, I pray that we don't get that far. It's why I'm running, to help avoid any type of upheaval, whatever words you want to use, any fighting amongst Americans. Because while I may not agree with progressives and liberals, there are a lot of moderate Democrats that are good American people who love their families and love America, who aren't trying to destroy this place. And those folks are the folks we've got to talk to and get them to influence their crazy left buddy and reel this out of control dive that America's on towards progressivism. And we got to reel it in so we don't get that far. It's why I'm running. We need leadership up on Capitol Hill. The average American, we don't need leadership. Folks don't need me to help them run their finances or make their decisions. They need somebody to go to DC and provide leadership to all the other wacky representatives we have there now.
How do you feel about who should be elected speaker? Should you be elected? Who would you vote for?
I don't know yet. I don't even know what my I don't know what my options are yet. I would say this: I'm not voting for any establishment representative. I would just as soon vote. Go pick a third grader, right? At your local elementary school. I just as soon vote for that young man or woman than I would an establishment politician. The problem is that the speaker has so much power over the representatives. That's backwards. The speaker is supposed to be a representative of the representatives and just simply maintain order. I am not applying for a job to go work for the Speaker of the House. I'm applying for a job to go to DC to represent you and all the other folks here in Eastern North Carolina, their interests, their families' interests, the fishermen, the farmers, and our veterans, and all the other hardworking folks. That's the job. The job is not to answer to a speaker. That's just not the job. So because I don't know who the options are, but I will tell you this: I will not vote for an establishment politician to be the Speaker of the House. It's not happening.
Well, I happen to think that Jim Jordan would make a tremendous speaker myself.
Oh, Jim's a good man, real good man. We got Thomas Massey out there in Kentucky. He's tip top, very conservative. Of course, Dan Bishop, very conservative. I wouldn't mind having.
I like Dan Bishop an awful lot. I wish that he was up here representing us, notwithstanding your candidacy. Right. I like him a great deal.
I'll tell you this, if Dan Bishop was representing the 3rd district, I wouldn't be running. I'd be campaigning for him.
You betcha. Absolutely.
You know? I'm not running because I want this job. I'm running because Greg Murphy has done such a horrible job that we need to replace him. And, you know, and I've told folks 4 terms is all I will do. All you can have is 8 years of my life, right? That's it. I've already served our nation my entire adult life. We weren't supposed to be career politicians. So I've told people, and I'll say it again, 4 terms is it. But I will also talk to the constituents and help find my own replacement, help find and groom someone to run when I'm out of there. Someone that Eastern North Carolinians will know that I helped get ready for the job, that that we picked together, right? Not that I picked. Someone that we go around during my terms in office, and people meet them and say, yeah, that young woman or that young man will be a good replacement for you, Tony. Get them ready. And that way, when I'm done and they become a candidate, they get to go and they'll have challengers. And that's a good thing. But they'll be ready for it. This whole idea, it's backwards that these politicians do everything they can to hold on to their seat. I'm telling you that I'm going to be willing to and happy to hand it off to someone else. I'm just not a politician. I never once in my life thought I'd be running for an office. At this point in my life, I thought I'd be about ready to retire and just go hunting. So yeah, my take and my approach to this, I think it's just so much different than the average person or the typical person who is attracted to politics. I'm just not it.
Well, you know, I was in the military back in the mid 60s. And, you know, when you're in the military, you have an objective, and you're focused on achieving the objective. You have certain qualifications and goals and ideals that are drilled into you by the military that you remember all your life. So, you know, when the time comes for you to take on any responsibility, I think those things that the military taught you are the way to achieve success, no matter what the goal is. So,
Absolutely.
I'll ask you one wrap-up question. As you travel around and speak to various groups, how are you being received?
Really well, really well. You know, it's funny. People would describe me as a breath of fresh air, and you know, because I'm not a politician, but I will tell you, you know, that's an interesting way to hear myself being described. Yeah, it's great. You know, so especially amongst all the women in the district. You know, and let's face it, right now the most active conservatives are by far, it's a majority of women. And why? Because the Democrats messed with their kids, right? When they started mandating masks, and then the CRT hit the schools, now mama bears, man, their daggone fangs and canines are out. They're mad. They're, you always say, there's that saying, don't interrupt your enemy while they're making mistakes. So let the Democrats keep, right? Like, let the Democrats and these rhinos like Murphy keep pushing these mandates and voting for this stuff, because they're only going to upset the mama bears more and more. But yeah, those are the type of folks who are very excited about me running. They know, and that you know, Greg's history, they're informed, they've looked up his voting record. So when they hear me talk about getting rid of politicians, they talk about term limits, you know, they're excited for a candidate like me. And I'm just the exact polar opposite of a politician. And that's what folks are looking for. I'm also honest. I'm also unafraid. I'm I've clearly encountered far more formidable adversaries on the battlefields than I'm having to deal with politicians. Even though it's a different type of battle space or battlefield, folks are just excited that I'm in that fight, that I'm willing to jump in here, because I think folks also know it's just not in my nature and my character to do this. So they're appreciative. That's one thing I get, is that people thank me for doing it. And, you know, I look at it like this. I've done a lot of operations that I didn't really want to do, but they needed to be done. So that's why I'm here. And, you know, another interesting point, you know, one thing I get when I travel around and talk to people is they say, yeah, we hear you. You know, people are skeptical of anyone running for office, and I don't blame them. So they'll ask me, they'll say, well, how do we know you're going to be different? And that is probably the most important question I get asked. I said, well, first and foremost, because people will say that DC changes people. I don't think that's true. Or maybe to some extent. I think Washington, D.C. and D.C. politics attracts a certain type of person, or at least it has in the last 50 or so years. Well, I'm not that type of person. And they said, well, how do we know? How do we know, Tony? I said, well, here you go. Let me throw this at you. Maybe this will change your mind. I pledge that I will give back $50,000 of my salary each year to charities in Eastern North Carolina. I'm not in this, you know, to get rich. I mean, somehow we've got representatives that make $174,000 a year, and within a couple of years, they're multimillionaires. I don't know what type of financial investment planners they have up there, but it's pretty suspect for you
They're
to go.
engaging in insider trading.
Absolutely.
You know,
mean,
and this is what I've been complaining about,
yeah.
The corruption and the self-dealing in
Yeah.
all elements, including the medical establishment, NIH and CDC and all that. They got people from private industry going into government service, and from government service into private industry, and millions of dollars slushing around. You know, it's pathetic.
Yeah. Well, you know, people don't know this, right? But you can go on a website called opensecrets.org and look at every contribution to any campaign, any PAC out there. So if you look at mine, and I urge people to, you can see that I have almost 3,000 individual human beings, regular people, have donated anywhere from $5 to the max $2,900 to my campaign. And I am proud of that, because I don't have a single corporation or a single PAC that has donated to me. But on the contrary, if you look at Greg Murphy's, more than half of his $1 million or so comes from big pharma contributions, like GlaxoSmithKline, a German-owned company, has donated thousands upon thousands of dollars to his campaign. That's pretty suspect. But here's something that's really interesting, and it's been submitted to the Office of Congressional Ethics for review. It's that serious. Greg Murphy facilitated, authored, and sponsored legislation to revitalize Emerald Isle Beach.
What was that again?
Yeah, so Greg sponsored legislation to fund the revitalization of Emerald Isle Beach, the beach there in Emerald Isle. Phase 1 of the project starts exactly where his home is, his one rental property, his investment property. He put his home in a trust for his kids. But once that project, all that money, $350 million that he got for Emerald Isle to fix their beaches, which is a good thing, right? I mean, we want to take care of our Outer Banks and all that sort of thing. But it just so happens, and I'm no conspiracy theorist, but I also don't believe in coincidences. He sold that home as soon as the revitalization program was funded and approved. He turned right around, dissolved that trust, and sold that house for over $3 million. The house that he only paid $750,000 for. That's the insider trading that we have. It may not be the stock market, but it's real estate. Now, like I said, it's been sent to the Office of Congressional Ethics, and they're reviewing it and investigating it as we speak. Now, the frustrating part is I know it was also sent to all the local news medias and national news medias, and not one of them have touched it yet. Now, there are a couple locals that I know are reviewing it as well. And the gentleman who discovered it was someone who was doing some campaign finance research on some local representatives, and they happened to see this project. It led them to Greg Murphy. So hopefully, that information will become more public here really soon.
Who is that man? I'd like to interview him.
Let me ask him if he would interview instead of me saying his name. I don't know him personally. The information in email was actually forwarded to me, and I've talked to him a couple times since. So let me ask him if he's willing to come on, and if so, I'll give you his contact information.
I got a call today about a candidate for office and has received endorsements from various grassroots organizations. And when and it was obvious that those organizations never checked the man out to find out if there was anything in his background that would be beneficial to the voters in the district he was running in. And but somebody did. And what they found out was that he was playing a shell game with licensing corporations and then raising money. And then when the year was up, he wouldn't file an annual report, wouldn't record any money that was ever paid to him or anything like that. Then the state would say, well, we'll just dissolve it. They dissolve it. He keeps the money, starts up another corporation. Had did the same thing like that for, several times. Wow. So, this is the kind of thing that, and this is not regarding a federal election, it's a state election. But this is, there's so much of this self-dealing and graft, and it's pathetic. And, so that's something I've been harping about for a long time. But anyway, it's good to know that you don't tolerate that sort of thing.
Let's face it, right? There's a big difference in coming on the hard times and not being able to, afford to pay your bills, or, you got to set up a finance program to pay off your taxes or whatever, because Lord knows we're all overtaxed. But illegal dealings to profit off of other people, and that's just one of the lowest of the lows. And clearly we don't need folks like that running for politics. So, there does need to be some type of standards. We live in a democracy, and let's face it, if the voters want to vote in someone that's, may not be the, the most honest or whatever, well, it is up to them, but they need to be informed, and there needs to be some type of leveling field where you don't just get to lie and make up stuff either. That's two very opposite of the spectrums there. And I'm not even sure exactly how we get to that, other than, us all doing better research And of course, when it comes to incumbents, research is easy. You just look at their voting record. But when it comes to someone like, even like myself or any other candidate, we need to do our research. And, you know, somebody like me, it's very easy to research me because, you know, a lot of my stuff is public record. My business, you know, is very simple and very easy to look up. And so it's easy to provide transparency. And there's nothing I have that I won't share. I have nothing to hide. I mean, I maintain those security clearances with the intelligence agency and the DOD and the security agency. So that should tell a lot of people that I keep my mess on the straight and narrow. You can't keep those clearances if you're financial. But I tell you, man, you know, it's John, it's just frustrating, all the mess, and I get it. It's why you have a podcast, is to get the word out. Man, we're so far behind the curve, you know, as far as our federal government being out of control, because, you know, our federal government was supposed to be the smallest thing, and the states and the local governments are supposed to be the ones that really govern us, because that puts it in the community. You know, I don't need a speaker from California telling Carolina what is best for them. You know, I don't know, man. It's definitely a lot of work. I'm a realist, and I know that, you know, a freshman congressperson can't necessarily change the world, but we've seen some outspoken freshmen, right, gain a lot of attention these last couple of years. Whereas you've got these political opportunists like Greg who like to fly below the radar so they can do their nefarious little dealings and stuff, you know, whereas you got like Madison Cawthorn up there raising all type of cane. And whether you're a Madison fan or not, at least you know where he's coming from, because he's not afraid to get out in public. You know, he's not it's sad to me that a 26-year-old is setting the example for so many other representatives just by being so vocal and so accessible, you know, accessible to his constituents, involved in the community. But I think it's because he's not an elitist, right? Madison, it's not like he came from, you know, a super wealthy family or something like that. He didn't come from a huge establishment campaign, you know, machine. So I think that's probably the biggest difference. And that's certainly the difference with me, is that, you know, I grew up in Pamlico County. My dad was in the seafood industry. My uncle's a farmer. Of course, I went in the military. The people of Eastern North Carolina are my people. You know, they're the people I care about. I was just at the down at speaking with Chris Fulcher, you know, Fulcher Seafood there in Oriental, North Carolina. Chris actually purchased my dad's freezers and all that stuff. My dad, he was tired of nickel and diming, being overregulated in the seafood industry, and he was ready to get out. So Mr. Chris bought my father's businesses out, so on and so forth. Well, I was talking with Chris yesterday. He paid $75,000. $75,000 to fuel up a shrimp boat. Fuel. That's double what it cost them last year. Now, the price of shrimp hasn't gone up, but everything that it cost them to catch those shrimp and process those shrimp and then deliver those shrimp has gone up. And our representatives ain't done a damn thing. And excuse my language, but when I talk,
you're absolutely right.
You know, when I talked to the fishermen, you know, I was talking to fishermen up in Hyde County. They didn't know Greg Murphy's name. You know, and that's just sad that you don't even know the name of your representative because they're not involved, because they don't care about that industry. And you know, another way of knowing this, Hatteras Inlet. Hatteras Inlet sat closed for months now because the federal fisheries, right, our national fisheries, has done everything they can to stop the dredging campaign up there. They can't get boats in or out of it. And again, our representative done nothing to help them. That's absurd, man. It's absolutely absurd.
Those people go up to Washington and they completely forget the people that sent them there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, you know, all I can do is tell folks, I promise people, I give my word, and my word is all I got at the end of the day. I give my word that that will not be me, that when I say I'm for term limits, I will self-impose them. I will work to get them in place. And like I said, I've promised and will be held accountable that I will give $50,000 of that income back to Eastern North Carolina every year I'm up there. And that's how you know that I'm different and I ain't just another career politician or political opportunist trying to scam the folks of Eastern North Carolina.
Tony, it's been a wonderful opportunity to talk to you. I concur that the description that you're like a breath of fresh air. I just interviewed Greg about a week ago, and as much as I've done for him, and I'm not, I'm not complaining too much, I guess. He did give me 3 interviews since he's been elected, but he was looking down his nose at me, and it was like he really didn't want to answer the questions, but that's just the way things are,
Right.
So,
So John, my older sister is a doctor, and you can Google her name. Her name is Narissa Crayer. She's world renowned. And we were talking, and she said, any doctor that requires you to call him or her doctor, beware. She's like, that's how you know it's a God complex. The same with my girlfriend, Melissa. She's a dentist. So therefore, Dr. Melissa Hoff. And she does everything she can to make sure that you call her Melissa. Right? She doesn't, those 2 women don't look down their noses at us. Right? They just know it's a title. Right? It would be like, could you imagine me trying to get you on this, or as I run, could you please call me Sergeant First Class Cowden? I'm not a title. I'm a person and my name's Tony, and I don't look down at anybody. So you'll never hear me or the people I associate with require the voters to call me by some title that was bestowed on me just because I was doing a job. It's absurd.
Well, thank you very much again, and look forward to seeing you on the campaign trail.
Thank you, John. The pleasure was all mine. I appreciate you having me.